Welcome to the Legal Growth Table. I'm Andrew Hutchinson.
And I am Barbara Koenen-Geering.
And together, we are your hosts. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with the people who are actually doing the work of growing law firms from the inside. The ones who know where the real conversations happen, and more importantly, where they don't.
Because everyone in this industry talks about growth. Very few talk honestly about how it actually happens. The politics, the resistance, the things that didn't go to plan. That's what this table is for. So let's get into it.
Welcome back to the Legal Growth Table. Thank you all for joining us again. I'm delighted, as always, to be with my co-host Barbara. And today I'm really excited to have Liz Sobe from Robinson & Cole. Liz, for those people who don't know you, which I'm sure is a very small number of this audience, maybe you could introduce yourself and give us a bit of your background.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I am the head of business development at Robinson & Cole, and I've been there for about 2 years. Robinson & Cole is a full-service AmLaw 200 firm with a global footprint, and I lead the team that is really just focused on attorney and client strategic growth. And over the past 30 years, it's a big number, but I've really worked with business development and client relations and focusing on growth and strategic growth along the way. I did take one sabbatical and helped a national toy retailer launch a .com, but I've really just been focused on professional services and growth. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, there are so many places that we could start, but I think that one of the big topics at the moment is growth, and firms are in this new world and preparing for whatever the future might look like, starting to think about growth. How has that changed across your journey in terms of how the firms that you've worked have thought about how do we grow? How do we put structure around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest change has been a shift from being inwardly focused to outwardly focused and really listening to the clients and paying attention to what their needs are in order to collaborate and growth. I think there was never, the word collaborate has always been around, but it's never really been used with intentionality. So I think it's a shift, right? It's from focusing on our own revenue growth, but understanding that we're able to better grow if the clients grow.
You said one thing that is just fascinating to me, which is listen to the client. The number of meetings that I've sat in and we've talked about client listening programs, and there's the sort of wry chuckle around the table because it's so hard to get partners to do that. What are some of the things that you've been able to do to enable that?
Yeah, I think it starts with education, right? So client listening matters because it turns assumption into insights, and you have to be able to, so for example, I'll just back up for 1 second. One of the things that I hear all the time from attorneys are 3 sort of dangerous but opportunistic quotes that I often share. One is, this works for me, and this is how I've always done it, and my clients love me. And so those are 3 things that whenever I hear them, and I promise you every single attorney will say them because they want to believe that they're true, and we all want to believe that they're true. But it creates an opportunity to dig into what that means for the attorneys. So listening to the attorney and then listening to the client helps us turn some of those listening matters into insights. So we can really understand what the clients let's say value, need, and experience in the relationship, because this is a relationship business, right? And there are no straight lines, nothing's linear in business development or growth. So client listening is urgent and exciting at the same time. I really try to not make anything scary, really want to make sure that the attorneys understand that, what they may perceive as a challenge is really an opportunity. So coming back to the client listening is that it's really client intelligence. So we really want to turn everything into actionable insights. So some of the things, why do we do it? That's the first point, right? Educating the attorneys on why we do it so they don't feel threatened by it. They want to be a part of that process. So I'll just pause there to make sure I've answered your question and I'm not going on too much.
No, that's perfect. Yes, that is always the challenge, right? Is the education piece.
No, I just wanted to link back, Liz, to the points that you made around growing with your clients as well, which I think we see a little bit more of where firms turn to being more informed and maybe even have their direction sort of like pointed or backed by where clients have said they're going. So I think also back to your client listening, a lot of firms that we've seen, they've sort of like confused client listening with client feedback taking only, so that it would be more like meta-related feedback or feedback relating to the services. But I would always argue that it would be best when you have these sessions, which I know you do too, is to also include questions around what are your challenges, like what keeps you up at night, but also what is your company's, i.e. the general counsel, for example, what are your growth ambitions? So where are you going? What is important to you? And then you might actually find out that they have a lot of business in X jurisdiction where you may not have an office, but you know that you could possibly get that work if you had a physical presence there. And if the work, if the business case is strong enough for that to happen, and if you see other clients come up with the same sort of like desire or need to be present in that particular jurisdiction, it might actually, make sense for you to build the business case out even further and potentially even open up an office to be able to serve your clients in those locations, which I know it rarely happens, but I see more of it now, which I think is a good sign. What is your experience on that side of the client listening program?
Yes. So you're touching on two things that are really important. The first is that client listening is not just client feedback interviews, right? So client listening is around, it's not just interviews and surveys. It's about using your data and your digital signals, and even sometimes the AI enabled analysis, which we'll talk about AI in a little bit, I think, is identifying those patterns, the risks, and opportunities across the whole client experience. So there are a couple of things. One, I just wanted to mention that there are internal exercises that touch on client listening, which is what I refer to, and I'm sure others do as well, as the client journey mapping experience, which is a very important client listening exercise, which in my experience is done between BD and the client relationship attorney, or perhaps a couple people that are on the relationship. And this is really to grow the attorney for their own coaching, but also for the client growth and the revenue growth there. And this is really looking at from the moment that client comes into the firm to today's point and all of the different touch points. And so mapping that, and that's a listening exercise as well. Client feedbacks for sure. And I'll answer your question about what to ask and how to respond to that. But onboarding a new client, lateral comes in and getting to know their clients. That's also client listening. End of matter debriefs. That's also client listening. It's really just to understand that relationship. A lot of firms do net promoter surveys and net promoter scores. That's also client listening. So when we talk about client listening, it's not just those feedback interviews, which are most often conducted with either an outside service, a managing partner or director, perhaps BD. But it really is, to your point, Barbara, it's more holistic. It's really the entire, in my opinion, everyone in the firm is responsible for client listening because you're all responsible for the client experience. So again, and there are other ways to do client listening, whether you do a win-loss interview or what have you. Coming back to your point about things to ask, we have a whole list of things and we tailor it depending on the client and the relationship. The best new client is an existing client. So when I say that, I mean the best new client is perhaps one that you've only been doing employment work and you want to bring in immigration work or what have you. We often talk about questions to ask, and examples that you gave are exactly questions that we'll ask. But the next step is how we respond to those questions and what we do with that information. So when we think about what we want to ask the clients in those conversations, we're always tailoring it to who the client is, what our relationship is with them, what our perceived goals are. And I say the word perceived with intentionality because when we're listening, our goals are going to change and shift. So we really want to understand the client's business, pressures they're facing, what's important to them, what they're running into, not just, I would never encourage someone to walk in and say, hey, how are we doing? How are things going? Those are really hard questions to ask. It's kind of like when your kid comes home from school and you say, how was your day? they don't know how to answer that. A client doesn't know how to answer, how are we doing? So we ask questions, what is changing in your business that's likely to change your legal needs? What does great legal service look like to you? A little bit without leading them, but just a little bit intentionality of thought around it. So that's sort of the second part of your question. And then I'll just add a little bit more to it of what we do with that information. I think it's really important. The follow-up is probably the most important part of the client listening, whether it comes out of a feedback interview or not. It's you said this and we did this. And to really be able to show that. And that's important not only to the client, but internally, to the attorneys and to the business development team, to the marketing team, to the research team, to everyone who touches the client, which is everyone in the firm. That's why you have a law firm. And to be able to take that and act upon it and go to the next step. And that's how you grow a client, right? That's how it comes full circle, which comes back to that client mapping. It's all, again, there's nothing linear about it. So long answer, but you asked a 2-part question and then I threw the third part of what you do with that information in.
No, love it, because especially the last part is probably the most important part, as you rightly said. And even, we've seen a number of firms also where I've worked in the past, and I've seen sort of the intention is there to run the program really well, but then the follow-ups, they sort of stall. And sometimes the follow-up stall because there is not really an answer, or the firm is not really going to change anything, as in there might be something around policies and things that the client would love to see change, but, inevitably the firm can't change them. Then that's also an answer. It doesn't mean because the client, is giving you feedback or makes suggestions, etc. It doesn't mean that you just have to change everything. But obviously the answer is the thing that they would be looking for, even if the answer is a no. And it just helps to build that trusted relationship. Another thing I wanted to add on this discussion is we had recently hosted a couple of sessions for Boost, our BDM marketing community, where we had GCs around the table speaking to BDM marketing professionals, senior people. And from all of the conversations that we've had, every single general counsel had told us, we have never been asked for feedback or have been part of a client listening program. And that really surprised me because most of the firms that I've worked in and the firms that we see in the market, they will have some form of a program in place. But then clearly it's not as rigid, I would say, as it probably should be, particularly if you hear about sort of multinationals not being asked a single question. That's really surprising.
It's interesting you say that, Barbara. I was talking to a guy who was he was doing something else when I spoke to him, but he was originally the head of legal for a very large Swiss bank, and we were talking about feedback, and he gave a really interesting comparison. So he said, every year we do an audit with one of the big four accounting firms, and that's an extensive piece of work. There's a lot of people involved in making that happen. And he said that after every audit, the accounting firm would come back in and they would spend anywhere up to 80 hours interviewing every single person from within the bank that was involved in that process. And they would deliver a report back to the bank saying, here are our findings. Here's what was good, here's what was bad, and here are the things that we're going to do differently next year when we do your audit. And then when they walked into the audit at the beginning of the next year, they would then pull up those recommendations, and that would form the basis of how they then went about doing the audit in the next year. And he said, as a comparison, we could spend the same amount of money on a legal matter. Legal matter's done, and they wouldn't hear one thing from the law firm. And it was really interesting. Two professional services organizations with two very different perspectives on the importance of feedback, right?
That is really interesting. I generally start with 4 different types of clients to listen to, which will often involve to an interview or some sort of touch base. But the 4 sort of buckets, if you will, that I think of that require the most attention for listening, are the high growth potential, right? These are the ones where I see room for revenue, cross-selling or cross-serving, or a relationship opportunity. And we have a list of sort of no-go considerations, if you will. And the client may fall into 2 or 3 of these and not the others, but there's still a relationship opportunity potential there. So high growth potential, at-risk clients. An at-risk client is one that's portable, undersold, or silent. There's just not a lot going on. We don't know a lot about either from the client's perspective or the attorney's perspective. So at risk, institutional anchors, right? Those top revenue generating clients. And then market bellwethers, which, similar to where the term market bellwether came from, right? The ram with the bell who would lead the sheep, right? Those industry leaders, that are either in industries where we are wanting to get into and not as familiar with, or where we see ourselves as industry leaders. So the market bellwethers. And then at the end of the day, those 4 types are almost all of your clients, right? Those are almost the ones. And then shortly after that, a 5th one is probably your newer clients that either come in through laterals or ones that are coming in that you sort of unexpected clients. So you really should be listening to all of your clients in one way or another. And again, it comes in all of those different shapes. It's often client feedback interviews. It's often conversations. And then the 6th bucket that I do pay attention to is if an attorney says, could we do something with this client? That is a response to me that there doesn't have to be a formal program, but that attorney wants to grow, either personally or professionally, and may not be a big opportunity with that client, but that attorney has said, I either need help or I see a potential, or could you help me find the potential? So that would be the 6th bucket for me, which again, at the end of the day, keeps the business development team busy, but creates opportunities. It's all about opportunities. People laugh at me when I say I have no challenges at work. And they say, you work with lawyers. How is that possible? I say, it's all about opportunities, right? It's just a shift.
Yeah. It is a shift. It's a mindset shift as well. So do I assume like across these 6 different buckets, if you will, you have different approaches as to what you would be doing around those client groups?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's tailored and customized to the client, but also to the attorney team, right? If the attorney team, if there's going to be succession either on our side or the client or perceived on the client side, we will tailor it appropriately. I have people that join my team and either if they're new to legal and I say, well, this is going to be hard to swallow, but every day, there is no typical day, and everything depends and everything considers, but that's all about tailoring. It's a people business with law built in, legal is not, no child grows up and says, I want to work and do business development. That's not.
Sadly not. No.
Sadly not.
It's changing that, Liz.
I may start doing career days in the elementary school across the street, but it's not linear. There is no perfect path, but we do have those considerations. We do have those approaches and thoughts built in. But yes, it's tailored to every client, and we can't tailor it unless we listen. Which is why it's not, you can't just open a listening program and say, okay, here's the menu. It has to be done constantly and continuously.
And who's in the driver's seat of this program across the different buckets? Is it the BD and marketing team? Is it the attorneys? How does that work?
So I read somewhere that a lawyer does 60% legal work and 40% business development. I'm sure it depends who you talk to. They could shift and change it. So they should always be doing a piece of this, but I think the drive really has to come from the business development professionals who are going to really be the engine and keep it moving forward to allow the lawyers to do their legal work, but know that building and keeping these relationships is a very large piece of their business and their day-to-day. But I really think that the business development team has to be the one to keep it moving forward. Otherwise, it falls off. It's so easy to put it aside. You have to build the habits to keep it moving forward. It can't be the sort of thing where you say, I'm going to schedule 20 minutes on Tuesday and Thursday, because that you can't put that on your calendar. It has to be a habit that you keep knowing and understanding. So I really think the business development team has to drive it, but everyone has to be on board.
And what about the client-facing conversations? For example, when you interview clients about do a needs analysis, for example, or just gather some feedback from them, who would be doing that? Is it the attorneys, partners? Is it you, your team? I mean, we've had lots of conversations about this, and I've seen different approaches across different firms that have worked and have not worked so well, but I'd be really interested to hear from you.
So I'm a firm believer in that relationship, and do think it should be the attorney who has the relationship with the client, unless it is a deep client feedback interview, in which case I think it should be the managing partner of the firm, perhaps with the business development person there with them. But it depends, again, depends on the client, it depends on the relationship, depends on the firm, but it is a relationship business. So I think that to have that deep trust, the attorney and their client should be having some open conversations. Although I've had conversations with clients, and, I think it depends. Again, I hate to say it depends, because that seems like not an answer, but that's the nature of our business, right? That's the nature of you could have one top institutional anchor client who feels more comfortable sharing in a different way than the next one, or a new client coming in who wants to build new relationships. So that's part of listening. You have to just figure out what's going to work best for the opportunity. But I do think the attorneys need to have that sort of relationship. They need to be able to work outside of the law matters to have the relationship matters.
Do you find that you have to coach them in preparation for that? I think, sometimes one of the things that I hear is that the partners they're not very good at asking those questions. And I don't mean that from saying the words in the sentence, but knowing that you ask this question and then being able to go on a sort of investigation, if you like, through questioning to draw out some of this information. Because asking the first question is the easy bit. Continuing to ask the questions and do that in a conversational fashion that draws out the value that you're talking about, that's a real skill for some people. And I wonder, I guess I have two questions. Do you have to coach people? And then I guess my second question is, are there partners in particular practices that tend to be better at that than others, maybe?
Yes. All about the background of the relationship with the client, all about the information about the industry and where we think they're heading and that sort of information. Then there's a lot of deep diving into the person, sharing about everything we know about the person, right down to personalities and likes and dislikes and things like that. But then, yes, how to pivot in a conversation. If you get some unexpected negative information, how to manage that and process it. So yes, there's definitely coaching. And in some instances, that's a place where you may say, you should bring a friend, or someone from BD should be there, or perhaps someone who's outside of the relationship should be there. But it's very similar to coaching someone who's going to speak to the media, being able to pivot. And there's role playing at times, which, people always sort of feel uncomfortable about. And then after the fact, They say, I'm so glad we did that. So yeah, a lot of research, a lot of prep. And then I immediately follow up while it's still all fresh.
Do you think that your peers talk about how hard it is to get partners to agree to do some of this stuff? Do you think there's an element of that is arrogance, right? And we've talked about that. Well, I'm the best litigator in blah blah and blah blah, so of course I'm going to be fantastic, and they won't have anything negative to say. So there is a level of arrogance that exists, I think, in certain corners. But do you think there's also a fear factor for people because they don't know how to do the things that you've just described? And by building that coaching around them to support them in doing that, you can actually drive more engagement in doing client listening.
Yeah, but I would even argue that it's not arrogance at all. It's fear. It's, or
interesting. Okay.
I'm too busy. I don't know what it means. I don't know the value of it, and which comes back to that very first point we talked about, which was the education. So I think it's the fear of the unknown, of what is going to come out of it. My clients love me. do they love me? What's going to happen? I'm not sure. So I think it's a little bit of fear, which is why we do a lot of prep, and a lot of listening throughout the relationship. Which again comes back to a client feedback interview shouldn't be a one and done. Every client should be looked at as an account, with a mindset of an approach, which is why professional services and accounting firms have this account mindset, which is very different than I'm one step at a time. And I think a lot of attorneys are being coached to look at things a little bit more holistically from a relationship perspective. So when I talk to my clients, I don't talk to them about their client. I talk to them about their client relationship, and I'll use words that sort of make them feel a little bit more like, connected. So I think it's more fear. I think, arrogance is masked by fear. It's the unknown. It's the unsure. But, and the conviction that they, I have to move in these directions. I learned this in law school. I have to go in these directions. We pause a lot and simplify things, but not in a way that dumbs it down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but also I think what you touched on earlier around the client journey, I mean, if you can rephrase this as part of the client journey, and actually it is a touch point in your client journey. So the touch point offers you as an attorney the opportunity to actually be in front of your client once again, which is also then an opportunity for a potential sale. Like, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be selling, but it's just an opportunity if you get to listen to your clients, and you will probably find out something that is going to help you to have an advantage over, the intelligence that you hold, so that you can use that for identifying other opportunities going forward. That's where the real strength is. So it's essentially also potentially a conversation, a sales conversation, a lot more subtle, which I think would suit attorneys actually even more, because they don't have to sell directly.
And for a lot of the attorneys, I'll have the conversation of, does your client think of you as their lawyer or their trusted advisor? When you think of, in crisis, are you one of the first people they want to call? In good news, are you one of the first people they want to call? Where do you fit in their sort of personal advisory board? Because you want to be in that. You want to be someone that they think of, not just when they have a problem or an issue. You want to be someone that they're thinking of in that inner circle, if you will. So that's where the relationship really matters, and it doesn't, we used years ago, everyone used to say, well, I don't play golf, so I'm never going to get there. But there's so many other ways to cross that bridge to build that relationship. So yeah, I think you're right.
And that's a really interesting point that you made there, because when you said I don't play golf, so what would I do? And I think we see this even more so around relationship building now, because we see a generational shift as well, right? Clients that were clients, 20 years ago, they had different interests than the clients that we see now. They also probably have a lot more choice. The competition is rising. So again, to find the right things for your client is deeply personal now. So just to have a one size fits all, I've also heard firms say, our webinars and seminars aren't as successful anymore. But what really works very well for us is like smaller roundtable sessions. And I think it's because people, they've got such different interests now. I mean, there's so much available in the market generally. I don't even know what to choose from for myself. I love everything: paddle, golf, tennis. You call it, and I'll be there. But that's not workable. So you'll have to find something that you can attract, groups of people to, or generally find something in common. But do you see that generational shift in your work as well already, as you advise your attorneys on how to deal with their clients in that program?
I do. And again, this comes back to listening, right? It's listening not just with your ears, but with your eyes. You're on a Zoom with someone. What's in the background? Do you see a big Michigan, poster on the wall or whatever it may be? And it's listening not just to what's being said, but what's not being said. Someone mentions, oh, I'm going skiing for the weekend. Make a note of that. They ski. My son's graduating this, where are they off to next year? And making notes of those things. And if they say, oh, they row at Tufts, make a note of that. Head of the Charles is coming up, little things like that. And those are little touch points that you can just hold on to, but that's listening, right? It's listening to the silence. It's listening to what's not being said. And that's all part of the relationship building. So you're paying attention to what's happening in the legal activity, but also in that relationship activity. And so we really try to help the attorneys see that big full picture. So as they're going down this non-linear, sometimes really difficult, scary, to Andrew's point earlier, path, and again, the generational too, right? So as some of our attorneys, there may be succession on the client side. So we may have, and we're crossing generations. We have, and I think other firms do this too. We have cohorts at Robinson and Cole where we've got attorneys that are from all generations or levels of their career path, cross practices, cross geographies that come together to talk about, there's peer mentoring and there's BD collaboration about, I've got a new contact at my client. They're right out of law school, or they're, 30 years younger than me. I'm trying to look for ways to connect with them. Or I have this, my daughter plays lacrosse and I just discovered that another parent on the team is the in-house, is an in-house GC at this tech company. And I really want to bridge the personal to professional. So these are all things that you listen for, and then you have to sort of process and move forward. So, yeah, it's exactly that. It's all sorts of things that are different and shifting and changing, which is why listening is so important.
And that's all it is. It's all about listening, and it doesn't really require a formal structure as such. As you said, it's in any and every conversation that you have with people generally. Listen to the things that are potentially not really being said that you can use to your advantage. Liz, I just want to thank you so very much for sharing your insights on our podcast. Thank you for being a guest at our table. I think we could have talked for another hour at least. So we would be delighted to have you back and dive even deeper into this topic, which will always be incredibly important and potentially even more so now, with AI obviously playing a huge role in how we deliver our services. So I think we need to get you back to talk about AI and relationship building and client listening a little bit more. But for now, thank you so much, Andrew. As always, it's been a pleasure. And
always
for our listeners, we will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
If this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone in your firm who needs to hear it.
You can find us on Spotify and YouTube, and follow along on LinkedIn, where we keep the conversation going between episodes.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.